and thank you for tuning in to the Lessons of Vietnam show. I hope you've been to wherever you are. It seems like out west they're flooding, and we've had our share of rain here around my house. One day last week we had about 10 inches, so I thought I was back in Nam for a while. Our show tonight is going to be one of several parts. It's called The Secrets and Mysteries of the Vietnam War. And this show we'll be talking about some of the secrets and mysteries of the Vietnam War. You may just scratch your head and say, you got to be kidding me, or you may say, I don't believe it, or maybe even, no, yeah, okay, because it's going to kind of go, you got to be kidding me, whatever, okay. I believe you'll be entertained and maybe even mystified. Each event has been researched and to the best of my abilities are real. I had to throw out some stuff that was not necessarily backed up. Please, as always, if you disbelieve anything you hear or see on the show, know more about the subject or just question the story, please let me know. I want to correct any part that's not true, because it's important that we get the real story of the Vietnam War, and that's all this little weird stuff that we're going to be talking about. And as you see on our opening slide there, your host, Bill Dixon, that's me, Vietnam 67, 68. I went through the little thing called TET. We're broadcasting courtesy of Nissan Communications, who gives us the studio and the expertise of its owner, Amnon Nissan. If you need to contact me after the show or whatever, it's dixonbill80@yahoo.com. We invite you to take part in the show, be part of the show. To do that, you can dial 919-518-9773, or even better, by Skype, Computers 2K Voice. And that way you can take part of the show, ask questions, make comments, or whatever you choose to do. But always look forward to having some contact with the outside world there to see who there's somebody out there. Other than this mic here, I don't know what's going on a whole lot out there, but I do hope you enjoyed the show. And the next slide is a very important slide we always start off with, is the Veterans Crisis Line. As we all hear, there's been 22 veterans a day who commit suicide. There's a lot of veterans out there that are in crisis with post-traumatic stress, depression, and so forth. And if you are a veteran, you know a veteran, or you know someone who knows a veteran, encourage them to reach out and dial 1-800-273-8255 and press 1 and talk to them. There's some good people out there waiting for you to talk to. If you got a vet center in your area, be sure to reach out to the vet center. They got some good people there. Okay. I got one more public service information here. The Triangle Purple Heart Dinner. We are broadcasting from Raleigh, North Carolina, and the Triangle is made up of Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, and all the cities around it. And August 17th at the McKimmon Center, which is right off Western Boulevard at North Carolina State University, the Triangle Purple Heart is going to be doing a dinner. If you know of a Purple Heart recipient in the Triangle area, you or have them reach out to the dinner for them and their families are free. If you would like to attend, the tickets are $25 and you can get them through Everbright. If you want some information about registration or volunteering to help or sponsorship, there's your information on there. But reach out to anyone that you know that received the Purple Heart, and not just necessarily Vietnam, but any of our wars. Have them to become part of the dinner and be honored for their activities and so forth. That is August 17th, 2019. Now let's get on with the show, and we can, if you have any questions, call in and ask about this or whatever. We're going to get started with the show and see what our first mystery is. Secrets and Mysteries of Vietnam War, top secret. Some of this stuff was top secret for a while, but now they're starting to declassify. And we're going to be covering some strange things. I can tell you, the Bigfoot, I think, is one of the first ones, the Bigfoot of Vietnam. Let's see what we got here. Okay, no, it's not. Okay. To those enjoying a picnic on an idyllic picnic ground in Bly, Oregon, on the morning of May 5th, 1945. Now, I realize this is not Vietnam, but we're going to tie it back into it. The horror of the Second World War must have seemed a world away. But for a 26-year-old Sunday school teacher named Elise Mitchell and 5 of her pupils, Sunday school class pupils, that was about to change. While playing in the park, the group stumbled upon what appeared to be an enormous deflated weather balloon lying in a clearing. As the youngsters and their guardian approached the strange object, a 33-pound bomb tethered to the underside of the limp canopy suddenly exploded. The blast killed all of them instantly. While news of the tragedy rocked America, it is hardly surprising the United States military. For months, the War Department knew that Americans' airspace was being invaded regularly by strange automated bomb-dropping balloons. They just weren't reporting it. They just didn't want the word to get out and have everybody in panic, I guess. Okay. While Allied planners knew that devices carried both anti-personnel bombs and incendiary explosives, the precise origin of the dangerous invaders still remained a mystery. Were they being sent aloft by Germany or Japanese spies operating within the United States? Were they coming from ships or submarines cruising off the coast? Some even hypothesized that inmates in Allied POW camps inside North America were somehow launching these secret weapons secretly. Don't know exactly how POWs were doing that. Only later did it emerge from that the balloons were in fact coming from Japanese home islands half a world away. These balloons floated all the way across the ocean from Japan. And you can see one of them there as it's floating through the air, but it came all the way to the United States. Okay. Once launched, the balloons would rise to an altitude of more than 30,000 feet, at which point they would float into jet stream and float eastward on the massive air current at speeds up to 100 miles an hour. A rudimentary venting system would release hydrogen if the balloon rose above 39,000 feet, while ballast would be jettisoned automatically if it dipped below 30,000 feet. After 3 days aloft, the balloons would more than likely be over North America, at which point a mechanism would release the explosives. Once emptied, the balloon would self-destruct by way of small explosive charge. You know, that's a lot of planning back in 1945 with all that to do that and so forth. And but you can see it. Now, the Reverend Archie Mitchell, you remember the lady a while ago, her last name was Mitchell? Well, her husband was at the time parking the car when they came upon the bomb. The Reverend Archie Mitchell, the husband of Elise Mitchell of Bly, Oregon. In 1962, the Reverend Archie Mitchell was seized by the Viet Cong bound in front of his second wife. Now we're going back to Vietnam. In front of his second wife and daughters, he was seized by the Viet Cong and taken away from the leprosarium where they're working near. Okay, we're just going to let you read that son. Bly Oregon, Vietnam, never to be heard from again. See, he was supposed to be blown up with his wife. I guess karma. This was the second wartime tragedy for Mitchell. 17 years earlier, almost to the day, his wife was one of 6 people killed by a Japanese balloon bomb. The only deaths in the mainland United States caused by a Japanese attack. Okay, that kind of ties it back in. However, there's more tie-in. Within 2 years of losing his wife, Mitchell married again, and the couple moved to Asia and eventually made their way to Vietnam to serve as missionaries. They were working at a facility for treating lepers when the Viet Cong showed up on the evening of May 30th, 1962. The VC seized 3 Americans, Dr. Eleanor Ardell Vietti, Mitchell himself, and Dan Gerber, a 22-year-old volunteer, looted the facilities, harshly reprimanded the Vietnamese for working with the Americans, and disappeared with the captors. Mitchell's wife and 4 children were spared only because the other 3 promised to fully cooperate. Betty Mitchell, wife number 2, stayed at the leprosarium until she was taken captive in 1975, along with 6 other missionaries by the Viet Cong. All were released 10 months later. Archie Mitchell, Dr. Vietti and Daniel Gerber are still listed among the 17 American civilians who went missing during the Vietnam War, still missing in Southeast Asia. It's amazing how things play back and over the period of time. Okay. The United States, I think we have the Sasquatch, we have Bigfoot, the Yeti, and the Abominable Snowman. I think there is other places, but all these mysteries are out there, and we have all these pictures of the Abominable Snowman and the footprints and so forth, and you kind of wonder, is it made up or is it real? And that's an interesting conversation to itself. Now, in Vietnam, they had the Rock Apes. American GIs began to come back with tales of something weirder than their enemy lurking in the forest of Vietnam, and it seemed that the Viet Cong were not the only thing to watch out for in this dense underbrush. When you were out at night in ambushes and so forth, and you started to hear noises, it may not always been the Viet Cong or tigers. Here, the foreign soldiers would come face to face with a creature that was well known by the locals, yet new to them, a humanoid, hairy, biped, the likes of which none of them had ever seen, which would lurch forth from the deepest jungle to startle or even attack, and which come to be known as the Rock Apes. Even before the fighting started in the jungles of Vietnam, there had been long stories of something strange lurking in remote areas here. Various peoples of the jungle choked interiors of Vietnam, and Laos, in particular with the Vung Quang Nature Preserve, have a rich tradition of stories of bipedal, hairy, ape-like creatures known by various names, such as the Batutut, the Ujit, and I'm not even going to try that one. Also written as, about rungs, or jungle people. These jungle people are said to be around 6 feet tall, stout, and very muscular, with protruding stomachs and covered in hair, ranging from brown to black in color, except for the knees, the soles of the feet, the hands, and the face, which remain bare. Although they inhabit isolated, remote jungle areas, the Rung are reported to be rather bold and aggressive and will apparently attack humans without thinking twice about it. They are said to travel in troops and are most active at dusk or during the night. The locals of these regions consider these creatures to be merely a fact of life. But the Batutut was not really known to be outside world until war began to impede their domain. Now, we say, well, why didn't everybody see one of those? After the Vietnam War, they found the largest cave system in the history of cave systems anywhere in the world in Vietnam. But nobody, with the Viet Cong and American soldiers going all over Vietnam, it was not found until well after the war. It's been the last few years that cave was found. It's a lot of jungle and hairy stuff there. During the days when troops toiled and fought in clouds of mosquitoes, clouded jungle, dodging enemy bullets and hiking relentlessly through the humid, oppressive heat. Boy, that relentlessly hiking. There will be numerous reports from soldiers of strange creatures prowling through the forest that were neither human nor ape and would become known as Rock Apes. Nice looking fellow there, isn't he? Love his teeth. Accounts of encountering these creatures seem to have been commonplace throughout the Vietnam War from both sides of the conflict. In many cases, the strange beasts were mistaken for enemy troops only to startle soldiers when they were actually seen up close. There's a book, A Very Crazy GI. I read it some time ago. I tried to find my copy, but I couldn't find it. I think I loaned it to somebody. The most well-known in-depth published accounts of these enigmatic creatures came from a book by a veteran named Craig P. J. Jorgensen called Very Crazy GI, Strange But True Stories of the Vietnam War. The account described the ordeal of a 6-man unit from the 101st Airborne Division who were taking a break from a relentless hike through unforgiving, mountainous jungle terrain carrying their heavy packs. Even as they rested, they were attuned to the surrounding environment, very aware that the Viet Cong were everywhere and could strike at any moment. As the unit sat there resting, exhausted in their sweat-soaked fatigues, Some trees located about 50 yards uphill then reportedly began shaking violently, and it was assumed that this was the enemy. The soldiers prepared their weapons and trained an eye on the suspicious, jostling trees. As they sat in wait, mosquitoes buzzing around their heads and the creeping, sickening dread of the coming battle weighing heavily on their minds. It was then noticed that a long head with a face covered in reddish hair, in possession a huge mouth and dark, deep-set eyes had emerged from the bush. The startled soldiers then witnessed a strange creature step from the underbrush to reveal a 5-foot-tall, muscular frame enveloped in the same matted, reddish hair, after which it seemed it stood there on 2 legs to seemingly careful scrutinize the men. And I have a feeling they were in shock because they were expecting one thing and something else popped up. The soldiers then speculated that it must be a large orangutan, before one of them pointed out that the orangutans were not native to Vietnam. As they argued over what it could be, the strange beast purportedly lost interest in them and quietly slunk back off into the jungle. In one 1968 account from jungle veteran Robert Baird's diary, he describes an incident in which his unit began hearing inexplicable noises along the outer perimeter of their camp late at night, not knowing if what they were hearing was normal jungle life or the enemy. A Mexican-American corporal named Pancho, of course. Mexican-American, I mean, he had to be Pancho. My friend that was from Hawaii, we called him Pineapple. Took it upon himself to go out to investigate it in the evening. He was also a brave guy. Pancho determinedly marched up the hill to the communications bunker to see what was going on. When the corporal was on his way back, he was observed to let off several short bursts of fire from his weapon before hurrying back to camp in a somewhat unsettled, agitated state. Almost immediately, unit's lieutenant had been on the radio demanding to know who was firing and firing at what. When Pancho reached the camp, he excitedly related that he had been walking back and had noticed a bush that had not been there before. When he had leaned down to take a look, it had then allegedly snorted at him and causing him to panic and fire. If a bush would snort at me, I think I would panic and fire too. In another encounter from 1969, a patrol was caught off guard by enemy fire, after which everyone took cover. It was then that something strange made its presence known to one of the group. As the witness was laying there avoiding getting shot, there was a figure that broke out of the thick vegetation, which at first seemed to be a large man. But as it ran past, it was clear that this was something else altogether. The figure was described as being around 7 feet tall. Now, he was laying down, the soldier who saw this guy, in height, impressively built and mostly covered with reddish hair. Whatever it was moved extremely quickly, but was then caught by some bullets in the crossfire, after which it stumbled but didn't go down. It was then that the enemy began yelling something to each other, excited that the witness could not understand, before running off, with one of the enemy even leaving his weapon behind in a panic haste. Whatever this creature was, it scared the Viet Cong communists almost as much as, well, probably evidently more than the American soldiers. The American patrol regrouped and headed to a more secure area, and that night they were assailed by a barrage of strange animalistic noises from the night, sounding like whines, barks, howls, and grunts. The next day, some of the patrol requested permission to go to investigate what had been seen and heard the previous day, and as the search was underway, they came across an enemy soldier that seemed to have been viciously torn apart. The patrol was so disturbed by the gruesome sight, they ran back to their base by the hill, and one of the witnesses would later say, "The rest of the time in Vietnam, I never heard the sounds or saw anything like it again." The talk of what we had seen spread very quickly, and some of the locals called it a name that I can neither pronounce or remember. But the translation, if I call it, was stench monkey or foul monkey, something like that. I can't remember for sure. What I know is that it bothered me so much that I transferred from there to a job on a helicopter so I wouldn't have to be in the jungle anymore. Some of the rock apes ape accounts are truly dramatic and frightening. One such account given by Michael Kelly of D Company, 1st to the 52nd Infantry of the 101st Airborne Division, describes not one rock ape, but hundreds of them. In an account in 1968, 8 of the strange creatures came casually walking up a trail on a ridge of Nuimoa, Ta, and surprised a platoon that was in the middle of having lunch when they turned a ridge about 10 meters from where the men were situated. According to Kelly, the platoon at first immediately thought they were Viet Cong, and all hell broke loose. The squad of men opened up with the M16s and M79s grenade launchers. M79s is a grenade launcher, okay? Lighting up the forest in a vicious display of booming firepower and flying pieces of vegetation. Kelly himself was at the far end of a clearing about 50 meters from where the barrage of continuous shooting had started, and he grabbed a weapon to run to join them along with the platoon sergeant, taking cover under a toppled tree. For a few moments, Kelly and the platoon sergeant stayed hidden as the noise of gunfire erupted everywhere. When they finally gave each other a nod to engage, they popped out from behind the tree, ready to see sizable enemy forces descending upon them, judging by the nonstop barrage of relentless gunfire. What they saw instead was a platoon firing away at ghostly images that were swooshing through bushes and trees all around them. The mysterious intruders were described as being around 5.5 feet tall, and all but one was light brown to reddish brown in color. The other was almost black and was particularly aggressive, large male, which reportedly madly rushed at men through the thick underbrush, snarling and with teeth bared. Throughout the frightening encounter, the ape-like beast reportedly made sounds that sounded exactly like dogs barking. Then the creatures, whatever they were, abruptly melted away into the forest, disappearing as they had never been there. It just was not there all of a sudden. When the surprise platoon regained their composure, they searched a bullet-riddled, gun-smoked perimeter, permeated area and found no sign of any dead bodies of the animals, and oddly, not even fur or blood. Kelly remarked on the surreal scene. "This may sound very strange to you," Kelly said, "but although I had no or little concern about killing the enemy, the killing of innocent animals turned my stomach and could enrage me if done without being a necessity. But I searched the site and found not a drop of blood, which totally amazed me given the amount of firing that we had gone on. I wonder to this day if the men were shooting just to scare the rock apes away or whether they were really just poor marksmen. The men who suffered the surprise looked a bit worse for wear. I'm sure if you had to wash their shorts as a result of the unwelcome visitors, it really scared the crap out of them. I kid you not." I had heard stories of actually the rocks going in and attacking groups of Marines with rocks and so forth. This sort of mass congestion of rock apes congregation, I can't even read my own writing here. This sort of mass congregation of rock apes was apparently not an isolated incident. In another shocking account, another platoon was almost overrun by large numbers of the creature. In 1966, a highly strategic location known as Hill 868 in Quang Nam Province had allegedly been the site of a battle between the Marines and a large group of rock apes. In the account, Marines operating the bush called their captain to report movement in the bush, which they believed to be a large force of Viet Cong headed their way. The captain then radioed back saying that they should stay in place and that no one was to fire in order not to give away their positions. The platoon soon radioed back to say that it had turned out that it was not a Viet Cong after all, but a rather large group of hairy, bipedal humanoids all around them. The Marine patrol was commanded, again, not to open fire, but instead to throw rocks at the creatures to scare them away. Okay, and these heavy armored, well-trained Marines, don't shoot them, throw rocks at them. This would prove to be unwise, as the rock apes then began hurling rocks back with great force, all the while screeching and growling all around them in the jungle, an estimated hundreds of them. Despite the assault of rocks and numerous requests for permission to open fire, The Marines were nevertheless told not to shoot, but rather to use bayonets instead. Shortly after, the captain could hear screeching and screams of pain from both Marines and apes alike over the radio, as well as their frantic message, "We're going hand to hand." Shortly after, the hill erupted in a roar of gunfire, screams, and screeching. When the captain sent men to investigate, the war-torn area was found to be littered with injured men as well as allegedly bloodied bodies of several of the mysterious rock apes. No Marine had died, but several were seriously injured and had to be evacuated by helicopter. The alleged battle became so infamous that it was called the Battle of Dung. Hill 868 became known as among the men as being allegedly so infested with the rock apes that were called Monkey Mountain. Monkey Mountain is right off of Da Nang. I saw it from a distance, but never got to it. In 1968, members of the Mike Company of the 3rd Brigade of the 5th Marines operating Hill 868 apparently often came across plentiful physical evidence of the creatures there, such as droppings, tufts of hair, footprints, as well as hearing their eerie barks and cries at night. And the rock apes even occasionally assaulted them with rocks lobbed from the jungle. The apes were described as throwing like girls, but with velocity, and the men reported as being often seriously injured by the hurled stone projectiles. In one account given by a veteran named Steve Kenyon, a unit of Marines was out in the jungle of 868 at night testing out a new muzzle flash and noise suppressor for their weapons. It was setting up, then suddenly noticed a rock ape glaring at them from the thick vegetation, reportedly completely unafraid. After a few moments of staring at the soldiers, the creature was said to then let out a sound like a bark of a dog. One of the men threw a rock as it to scare it away and hit it dead on, after which the ape picked up a rock on its own and hurled it at them. It was then noticed that there were more than rock apes gathered around in the jungle, about 20 of them, which all began screeching, howling, and throwing rocks at the frightened men in unison. Despite the threatening situation, the unit did not open fire, instead making a hasty retreat. When asked later why had not shot at the creatures, Kenyon would say, I don't know. Don't seem right. But those apes started to come at us and we ran as fast as we could and we didn't stop until we were out of the jungle. You know, reading this stuff, I kind of go back to the story I used to tell why the Marines were in Vietnam for 13 months while everybody else was there 12. Don't throw grenades at the monkeys. Encounters with rock apes became so numerous and alarming that the North Vietnamese even mounted expeditions to go out and find evidence of them. According to Craig P.J. Jorgensen's book, Very Crazy GI, Strange but True Stories of the Vietnam War, in 1974, the North Vietnamese Party Secretariat ordered a scientific expedition to find definitive, solid evidence of the rock apes. Professor Vo Qua of the Vietnam National University was chosen to conduct the investigation, and while they did not see any of the beasts, they did find some curious tracks out in the remote jungle. A cast was made of one of the footprints, which was sent to be analyzed and was found to be wider than a human print, but too large to be that of an ape. Other expeditions followed up on the find, including one led by the North Vietnamese Journal, but was unsuccessful. So they were out there. Interestingly, this was not the first time footprints of the mysterious creatures been found. In 1970, a Dr. John McKinnon claimed to have found tracks of the creatures and believed them to be of hominoid origin, perhaps similar to Megathropus, okay, which locals said came from a creature they called to Batut Utut. The tracks were described as having human-looking toes, but being around the size of those of an Asian black bear, which are not native to Vietnam. McKinnon wrote in his findings in 1978 in his book, In Search of the Red Ape. Although he would never find definitive proof that rock ape or rungs ever existed, McKinnon would nevertheless discover several new species of large mammals in the Vung Quang Mountains rainforest in 1992, demonstrating that the region was more than capable of hiding large new species from sight. I guess because we were all over the jungles and so forth, where we came in encounter with them. In another report from Army Reporters, 27th of April, 1970, a guard fired at movement along the camp perimeter, and in the morning, strange footprints where neither human nor ape were found, as well as blood splattered along the forest floor. The prints were photographed, and the creature was called Powell's Ape, named after the depot company commander, Captain Powell. In 1982, more footprints were examined when Professor Trong Hong Viet of University of Hanoi found them while collecting specimens near Chumaray and in that Song Sathay district. The professor made casts of the prints, which measured 11.02 by 6.3 inches long. Photos of these odd casts were later published in the Japanese 14 magazine, 14 News of the World. Dr. Bernard Minh also wrote The Curious Prints in his opus On the Track of Unknown Animals, in which he recounted the tale of Lieutenant Alan Spiller of Cumberland, Rhode Island, who, while on a helicopter patrol for the 101st Airborne Division, spied some strange, huge footprints below, he would say, of the findings. I had been looking at footprints from the air for quite a while and noticed the exceptional size of these immediately. I landed to get a closer look, and sure enough, these tracks were about 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. They were embedded deeply, indicating a heavy wear. The stride of whatever made them was about 4 feet. The creature was estimated as being perhaps around 8 feet tall based on the size of the prints and length of stride, underscoring the sightings reports that spoke of much larger species. Even more impressive than footprints of the rungs are actual bodies that have been claimed to have been found on occasions. In one case described by a Steve Williams, it was claimed that a veteran had told him of doing a nighttime low-altitude Special Forces drop in the thick jungle interior of Vietnam during 1967-68. When after the drops, the team hear a low gurgling sound over a period of 3 nights. At nights. It was then claimed that on the 4th night, they came across the upper torso of a decomposing Bigfoot-like creature, which had been horrifically blown apart by something, perhaps a landmine. Since the creature had been long dead, they surmised that what they had heard over the last 3 nights had been perhaps its mate mourning. In Williams' account, he says of the gruesome find, they could see into the body cavity, spine, lungs, and such. All was crawling with bugs. There was shorter hair on the huge head. The eyes sunk back 1.5 inches from the brow line. It had long arms, very large and long femurs. One hand was still wrapped around a branch. He, the original source of the tale, didn't say what color it was, but he did mention that it had a flat nose. If the creature had its legs, the estimated height was around 8 feet tall. There was no sign of the lower half of the body. They were able to see the teeth, all flat, well-formed molars, except the canines, which were longer and pointed. Seemed adapted to living in the forest with long arms and fingers, or perhaps just build night nests like gorillas sometimes do. Another spectacular report published in the New York Times letters on April 18, 2010. A man named Graeme Webster tells of a curious event that occupied at the Strategic Artillery Summit on the western end of the DMZ called the Rock Pile. Been by that. One evening sometime in 1967, Marines from the 4th Marine Regiment were assaulted by a large number of rock apes, which were said to inhabit the caves in the area. The Marines fought back in a prolonged burst of firepower which lit up the night. In the morning, there were allegedly corpses of the ape-like creatures strewn about, and they were included in the situation rep briefing body count. I guess they listed them as Viet Cong for the body count. The incident sounds very much like the battle between Marines and Rock Apes that allegedly occurred on Hill 868 in the Battle of Dung, which was also claimed to have left bodies on the dead beast in its wake. It is unclear what happened to any of these bodies in the aftermath. In addition to bodies, there had been live rungs allegedly captured. with one notable report being that 2 of the creatures were caught by tribesmen near Darlok province in 1971. Again, it is uncertain whatever became of these creatures, although considering it was wartime and most had more serious issues weighing upon their minds, one wonders if anyone ever actually went there to investigate the veracity of the claims at all. Now, why do we see these? Some people say that was suggested deciding that these mysterious creatures are due to the imbibing of drugs by American soldiers, including the highly hallucinogenic lactic acid or LSD. Okay. However, most of these treats reports made by troops that were on active duty, trained observers, and would probably not have endangered their missions and lives of those around them by doing potent mind-altering drugs. When you're in the field, you didn't do nothing with drugs. When you're out in a base camp, you might participate in some. But when you're out in the fields with the bad guys coming along, you didn't want anything to do with it. There is almost the fact that the strange creatures were seen probably just as often by the Viet Cong as they were by the Americans, and were well known by local tribes. So we can chalk up all these reports up to both sides of the war spending all of their time in a drug-fueled stupor. In other words, the Viet Cong and the Americans were all, I don't know, stoned out of their mind on drugs and so forth. And they saw these hallucinogenics that don't look alike. So what we're dealing with here were these myriad reports the result of misidentification of a very rare yet known primate? Is this all the product of minds addled by the stress of war, drugs, or both? Or is it a chance there is indeed some new species of ape lurking around in these remote, isolated jungles, hiding among all the other large mammals discovered here in recent years? If so, are they still out there, and what are they? Are they an ape, a form of surviving human ancestor, or something else entirely? It is something similar to the orange pedec hairy hominid of Sumatra, which is often touted as being one of the most plausible cases of strange hairy hominid. Unfortunately, at time of war, there are more pressing issues at hand than tracking down mystery beasts. And as a result, many of these reports were never followed up on. To men out there in these jungles, this was just one more struggle to add to those already in place with the forbidding terrain and the constant threat of attack from an elusive enemy. Indeed, this seems to be common with report of strangeness from war zones. And many such reported phenomena have become lost in the midst of time, buried beneath the violence and combat. It seems clear that as long as there is a war, tales of the bizarre will seep in along with the tales of horror, and some of these mysteries may be gone just as surely as the lives lost. Now, that kind of gives you an idea of that something strange. I mean, we've been looking for, we've been looking for Bigfoot for a long time. We've been looking for the Loch Ness Monster. But we pretty much know there's some big monkeys in Vietnam. The first time I remember out, to say that I was a little apprehensive, to be putting it mildly, I saw these Viet Cong swinging through the trees. I mean, we were in the jungles. And I hollered at the sergeant, there they are. And he said, no, stupid, those are the monkeys. And from a distance, they looked like men swinging through the trees to me. But anyhow, I knew there were some big monkeys over there. Now let's go in a different direction here. Events we can't figure out from the Vietnam War. Colonel Charles Shelton was an Air Force pilot and the last person to be officially considered a prisoner of war taken during the Vietnam conflict. It was only on September 20th, 1994, that his status was changed from missing in action to killed in action. And that happened only after request from his children. They didn't know, it was just out there. It was a mystery, lots of things going on in the family and so forth. And they just petitioned the United States government to declare him killed in action. And you'll understand more in just a few minutes. In 1965, Shelton was flying a recon mission over Laos when his plane was shot down. At first, he kept his radio contact with the Air Force, but then radio contact stopped, and it was last time Shelton was officially heard from. No live POW has ever come out of Laos or Cambodia. There were, however, plenty of unofficial stories about just what happened to him. Some stories say that he was taken prisoner but survived his ordeal. Some go so far as to suggest he killed his torturer, securing his life in the face of a foe impressed by his bravery. That was a little harder to go, bud. The family heard other stories that he was actually alive and well in California, but forbidden to make contact with them as he was under government protection. I've heard that one. Also, him and some other POWs were kept there but couldn't reach out to the family. In the 1980s, those who were still listed as prisoner of war were reclassified as either body not recovered or killed in action, except for Shelton. The colonel was to become a symbol of all the others whose fates were unknown, but to take a toll on his family. I wonder why he was the exception there. Over 25 years after his disappearance, despondent and exhausted by decades of not knowing the truth, Shelton's wife committed suicide. Later, his children requested his status be officially changed to killed in action, that his name be added to the gravestone in Arlington Cemetery where their mother was buried. She was very active in the POW families movement. The wife of the only American soldier still listing as a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia committed suicide. Dorothy Marian Shelton died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in her San Diego home late last week, according to the San Diego County Coroner's Office. The 57-year-old mother of 5 was a founder of the national movement to account for all the servicemen officially listed as POWs or missing in action from the Vietnam era. Police said she left a brief suicide note to her family and was apparently suffering from depression. Her husband, Air Force Colonel Charles Shelton, was shot down in northern Laos on April 23, 1965, on his 33rd birthday. Now, going back to that period of time, I remember seeing pictures that were reportedly being of Colonel Shelton and so forth. None of it could ever be brought true. Like the stories, so many different stories out there, the POWs and so forth. The fact that they were being kept by the government, they were brought back, but they were kept for whatever reason by the government in California and couldn't touch their families. There were people that were pictures of people and so forth. So now we're going to go in a totally different direction. This one is, well, you may want to get somebody to come sit with you on this one. Operation Wandering Soul were designed to exploit Vietnamese beliefs about the deceased. The dead that didn't receive a proper burial were thought to be walking the earth forever, trapped and tormented, and once in a while, when things were right, reaching out to the living. Which goes back to explain quite often after a firefight, they carried off their wounded and dead bodies with them because they realized that if it happened to them, they wanted to make sure that they were taken away and given a proper burial. Burial, not barrel. In an attempt to strike fear into the hearts of the enemy and American military personnel, with the help of South Vietnamese volunteers, recorded some incredible eerie voices that were then played throughout the jungles. The tape, which became known as Ghost Tape Number 10, was widely used, but no one really knows what effect it had, if any. I can tell you, folks, I've heard it, and it would make me run. Reports are varied and sketchy. Some claim the tape had absolutely no effect on the enemy, that very easily saw through the ruse. Others suggest it was successful in at least leeching away some of the troops' morale. Finally, some reports stated that the tape terrified the Viet Cong so thoroughly that they abandoned their posts and surrendered. If you know what it is, the tape is undeniably creepy, filled with voices claimed to be from hell, trapped there after dying senseless deaths, looking for their children and waiting desperately to go home. Operation Wandering Soul. The Vietnamese legends held that on the anniversary of a person's death, a spiritual channel between our world and the afterlife can open, making communication possible. Was this just a phenomenon? And there you can see one of the propaganda leaflets they sent out, kind of give you an idea as they went out. Not only did they play the music, but they also at the propaganda pamphlets and so forth. The jungle of South Vietnam came to life with a loud wave of spine-chilling sounds. Mournful wailing, sobbing, and baleful shrieks filled the air. Unearthly sounds that seemed to be coming from everywhere, but nowhere in particular. And amid the blood-curdling chorus was a clearly audible warning. "My friends," pleaded a disemboweled voice from across the darkness, "I have come back to let you know I am dead. I am dead. It's hell. It's hell," it continued in Vietnamese. "Don't end up like me. Go home, friends, before it's too late." This eerie warning was followed by a chorus of other strange sounds, banging gongs, sobbing women, and a children's voice calling for her father. Now, I'm going to give you an example. Now, how would you like to be out in the jungle, in the dark, because of one of the street lights? Even if you don't believe in ghosts, hearing that noise. To the Viet Cong soldiers hiding in blackness beyond the American perimeters, these otherworldly sounds sounded like the wandering souls of the departed comrades. According to local folklore, the spirits of the dead that were not returned home for proper burial were cursed to walk the earth in torment until their remains were found and properly interred. Vietnamese legends held that on the anniversary of the death of one of these lost souls, a spiritual channel between our world and the afterlife opens, making communications possible. So the tape was the playing of the dead coming back and looking for their bodies. When these hair-raising sounds, just such a phenomenon, were their spirits of the dead or some past battle reaching out to the living, perhaps to the communist guerrillas listening, it seems that way. Operation Warning Soul. These noises were actually part of a taped broadcast that was being blasted across the countryside by American GIs armed with portable PA speakers. In fact, the entire program was recorded in a Saigon sound studio. It is all part of the top-secret U.S. military psychological warfare campaign known as Operation Wandering Soul. The voices and noises played in the jungle that night came from a session known officially as Ghost Tape Number 10, which you just heard part of. Organized by the United States Army's 6th SOP Battalion in cooperation with the U.S. Navy, the Wandering Soul campaign was intended to frighten and demoralize the enemy and hopefully compel many to desert their positions. Various American units employed similar recordings in a number of areas in South Vietnam in late 1969 and early 1970 with mixed results. On one occasion, the broadcast included an amplified tiger growl, which was recorded at the Bangkok Zoo. The remix was transmitted over a communist-controlled hilltop in South Vietnam. It supposedly led to 150 VC to abandon their positions. In other cases, the recordings were played from speakers mounted on helicopters and were supported by leaflet drops, as you saw leaflet. In some cases, enemy soldiers realized the hoax and concentrated their fire onto the choppers. Yet in a number of instances, the tapes were so effective that they reported terrified friendly South Vietnamese troops and civilians alike. So that kind of gives you the wandering soul. Now let's talk about another wandering soul. Okay. Why Vietnam veterans are not fond of Jane Fonda. But for several years, Fonda would be one of the most prominent public faces of the anti-war movement. But it wasn't until she traveled to Hanoi in July 1972 that she would really enraged critics and fundamentally altered how the world viewed her for decades to come. Now, some of the mysteries and secrets, she did not do everything that she is credited doing. There's a lot of myths out there of what she did. What she did was bad enough, but some of the stories out there, and to me, the mystery is going to be if we ever get rid of those bad stories and just listen to the real stories and how we're going to sort them out and so forth. But what she did was bad enough. Actress Jane Fonda sits on an anti-aircraft gun during a 1972 trip to North Vietnam. Now, what would an anti-aircraft gun in North Vietnam be doing? It'd be shooting down American airplanes. Okay. Fonda's transformation from an actress to activist began several years earlier. She was active in the Black Panthers and marched for the rights of American Indians, soldiers, and working mothers. But she was advised by other activists to focus her political energies during deciding to go all in as an impassioned voice for the anti-war movement. She and actor Donald Sutherland started an anti-USO troop to counter Bob Hope's famous shows for the troops. They called it the FTA, which they said stood for Free the Army. But it was also a not so subtle nod to the expression of F the Army, which was quite popular in Vietnam. Most people don't realize that Donald Sutherland was involved with her. Okay. Now here she is with former United States Senator John Kerry, Secretary of State and former presidential hopeful. Fonda speaks to Vietnam veterans at anti-war rally. By July 1972, when Fonda accepted an invitation to visit North Vietnam, America had been at war overseas and with itself for years. She went to tour the country's dike system, which was rumored to have been intentionally bombed by American forces, something the United States government to this day forcibly denies. If you remember New Orleans is below sea level. The dikes around New Orleans, and if the dikes would all go out, as some of them did during the floods and so forth, it would have been in bad shape. Where Hanoi was the same way. Had we had bombed the dikes, we would have flooded Hanoi and killed a lot of innocent people. There may have been some dikes damaged, but we did not bomb the dikes as I feel we should have, but we didn't. During her 2-week stay, Fonda concluded that Americans were unjustly bombing farmland and areas far-flung from military targets. North Vietnamese press reported, and Fonda later confirmed, that she made several radio announcements over the Voices of Vietnam radio to employ U.S. pilots to stop the bombing. Now, a lot of you had seen some of the pictures we've had before. They built the SAM missiles in schools and in villages and so forth, just to kind of make it hard for the Americans to shoot back. Okay. Operation Pocket Money. In 1972, the United States was deep in the Vietnam War. Vietnamization was underway, and the North Vietnamese communists had just launched an offensive on South Vietnam known as the Easter Offensive, or Mini Tet, or Tet 72 Tet. The United States was wanting to gain an advantage, possibly deciding to mine the ports of Haiphong with enemy water mines. Now, Haiphong Harbor is where the Chinese and the Russians sent the ships in with all the supplies that was carried down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. In May of 1972, Operation Pocket Money began with thousands of mines dropped in the water outside Haiphong's port. These mines were designed to be in place for about a year, but on 4th of August, dozens of them exploded. But they wasn't exploded by offset passing ships. So what set them off? You can see Haiphong Harbor there. Operation Pocket Money, laying underwater mines in North Vietnam's Haiphong Harbor, and why they exploded prematurely. Okay. At the time, solar interferences was suspected, but this information was kept classified. Since the declassification, civilian researchers have looked into the event again. They concluded that the military was correct. The culprit was solar flares. The answer is how the mines were triggered. Each mine has a magnetic sensor that can detect subtle changes in magnetic fields. If a passing ship comes close to the mines with its metal hull, the changed magnetic field will set off the mine. The other means to disrupt the magnetic field of a mine other than a metal ship hull. One of the most significant sources of magnetic fields is the sun. Occasionally, large eruptions from the sun, called solar flares, can send large plumes of magnetic material flying towards Earth. When these solar flares reach Earth, they can cause all kinds of magnetic disturbances. At their mildest, they are responsible for the northern lights and other auroras. At their worst, they can mess with GPS systems, interfere with communications, and in an instance, nearly start a nuclear war. According to the research paper, the 1972 solar flare was one of the strongest on record, in addition to exploding the mines at Haiphong Harbor. They also interfered with telephone lines and triggered power outages around the world. Care should be taken not to confuse a legend with a rumor. A rumor is merely a sort of plotless, unverified report. Rumors, for example, are frequently assumed the shape of so-called celebrity legends, like the annoyingly persistent rumor that TV's Leave It to Beaver star Jerry Matthews was killed in combat in Vietnam. Didn't happen. There are many of these celebrity-based rumors, as potentially gratifying as their truth might be. They are not to be confused with legends. Now, going back to, we were just talking about the solar flares. The last time I was flying back to Vietnam, we had to fly a bypass way we were supposed to go. We had to change routes because the new route, because of solar flares, we had to change routes, and the new route would have had us flying over North Korea. So we had to go that way and turn and bypass around North Korea and came back in, which took us an extra hour and an hour and a half. It was just took all that extra time and so forth, just by solar flares affecting the navigation of the plane. Thank you, as always, for taking your time to be part of the Lessons of Vietnam show. Part 2, as you see that coming up, to be part of Lessons of Vietnam show. Part 2, Secrets and Mysteries of the Vietnam War, will begin on 26th of June. Can you believe that would be June is gone and flying by already? So we'll be doing that show. Now that show will be, I'm going to tell you in advance, that show will be having a couple of subjects we're going to be talking about in that show that I won't say they might be R-rated, but they're going to be talking about some subjects that was kind of some of the rumors that were going on in Vietnam, something to do with razor blades and a black disease and so forth. So just wanted to bring that out to let you know that it's going to be an interesting show covering those things. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show, and look out for those monkeys. And if you hear those weird sounds at night, it's probably not the dead Vietnamese looking for their bodies. So you have a good evening, and thank you again for tuning in. And if you have a question or a comment and so forth, you didn't get in tonight, send us an email or put it on your calendar so you can tell us on our next show on the 26th, and reach out and tell all your friends that we're out here again. We did miss one show. We had, I was here, Amnon was here. We had the show ready, but we had a technical problem. But so we aren't missing you just because I know it can be irritating. I went to a Vietnamese restaurant, just found out today it's closed on Wednesdays. I think I've been there about 4 times before I realized it was closed on Wednesday. And couldn't figure out why they were open on certain days. So I hope you're enjoying the show. Tell everybody about us out there. We'd like to have more people looking. Again, I'm going to give it you so you can write it down. If you want next show, if you want to talk to us, it's 919-518-9773. And you have a great weekend, and I hope you stay dry and get you some Purple Heart tickets. Thank you.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.